So, welcome to the latest episode of What is My Country, the show where we chat about independence movements with politicians and academics and other people who have interests in these movements. I'm delighted to be joined by Siôn Jobbins, who is the chair of the campaign group Yes Cumbria. Siôn, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I presume I'm one of the other people.
Yeah, well, campaigner, I guess.
Right.
expert in Welsh independence, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So before talking about independence, though, I'm just curious, how did you become interested in Welsh, in the Welsh nationality? And when people say to you, what is the Welsh identity? What is Welshness? Right. What would you say to that?
Okay, so there's a lot of things there. So I start where I became interested. I mean, I've always been, what's called a nationalist. So we can discuss that word later on, I'm sure. But my background, I was born in Zambia. My parents are Welsh. They met in London, decided after getting married in '66 just to do something, and it's obvious a lot of new countries became independent from the empire at that time. Because of Westminster misrule, there wasn't much infrastructure in these countries, and Northern Rhodesia, Zambia didn't have enough teachers, so obviously a lot of the young people going up there. So I was born in Zambia. We returned back to Wales when I was a baby, a year and a half, and my parents, for some reason, settled in Cardiff. My father's from Brecon, which is in sort of Powys or non-Welsh speaking part of Wales. And then my mother's from Penllyn, Pwllheli area, right in the north, so a Welsh speaking part. And so my father didn't speak Welsh, my mother did. So the situation in my household was I'd speak English to my dad and then Welsh to my mother. Okay. And we were brought up in Cardiff. There was one Welsh medium school there for the whole city. 600 kids. So I think from early on, I was aware, there's two languages. I spoke Welsh with some people, not with other people. So my whole my mother's family spoke Welsh, whole my father's family didn't speak Welsh. And this was quite normal. That's quite normal upbringing in Wales in many respects, every part of Wales now. So I always felt Welsh. I always felt, Wales was a nation and that it had been denied nationality, and its nationality had been eroded, if you like, by British rule, or by being part of a larger body, which is the UK, where Wales and Welshness have always been a minority. And also I think actually having been born in Zambia, I remember my father, who didn't speak Welsh, he learned Welsh in his 30s when I was a child, so there's a period then I'd have bilingual conversations with my dad, and then Welsh mostly now. And he said, the language in Africa are stuffed, there's no, he'd seen what had happened in Africa, and there are differences always between Wales and Africa, but he could see some of the complexes around the language and identity in Africa, and so how that sort of mirrored what happened in Wales, either in history or contemporary wise, and so that sort of made sense to me as well. So I've always been a nationalist, and the family is my father actually from a Labour Party background. So he's the only nationalist in his family, but my mother may be liberal background, not too sure. But so that's my case. Second part of the question, I forgot the part.
So I'm just curious. So obviously you've obviously got a very strong Welsh identity.
Yeah.
But obviously I think that there are people who are very proudly Welsh who don't support independence.
Yes.
So why do you support independence?
For me, it's just the most natural. It's bonkers for me that someone identifies with Wales, don't have to be Welsh, and wouldn't support independence. For me, it's just a bonkers point of view to have. There are other countries in Europe which are smaller than Wales, which historically are weaker than Wales in terms of not that one wants to be sort of grade nationalities and stuff, but we're less developed socially or economically, certainly 19th century, 20th century. We're poorer. Even from the language point of view, we're less advanced, if you like, or a smaller language record or corpus than Welsh did, and they managed to become independent. A lot of those actually in my own lifetime, or regained independence, like in Eastern Europe. And for me, it's bonkers. Why would a Welsh person not want that status and self-belief and confidence? And also, then you look at the situation, and Westminster is a con. It's a bad system of government. I was reading last night that the Welsh Assembly has controls over all the ports in Wales, except for Milford Haven, which is the third busiest port in the UK with a huge tonnage, which is mostly oil. So on the one hand, Wales is told it's too poor to be independent, but on the second hand, the things which would be income generating, we don't have control over. So it's the whole thing is built on a lie. And so there's the idea, just the plain sort of identity type idea, if you like. I'm Welsh, I don't identify at all with Westminster or with the British institutions. I can identify with music and comedy, of course, but the institutions of the state I have no empathy at all with. And then there's the economic and social reasons. Thinking, why are we shackling ourselves to this dysfunctional government when other countries across Europe show that it's perfectly easy to become independent, or we do a better job.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, looking at the polling support for independence, it has increased in the last few years. I think in March 2013, the YouGov poll said it was 10%, and I think the most recent poll, I think it was conducted by Yes Cumbria, and YouGov showed it was 33%. So
that's it. Yeah.
Why do you think we've seen an increase over the last few years?
Yeah, it's always been kicking around to 10%, for decades. So a bit more, a bit less, depends on the mood. Something huge has happened in Wales, and Wales is the forgotten child of the family of nations of Britain. We're not used to this, and maybe it's part of the reason a lot of people don't have confidence in Wales as a nation. I think a few things have come together. When I think actually when Brexit happened, the day after Brexit, I held a one-man rally in Aberystwyth in support of independence. So. For me and for a lot of Welsh nationalists, we would, and it's been borne out as well, whichever way people voted, Brexit is nothing really to do with Europe. It's to do, nobody really cares about some of the policies. It's a Anglo-British nationalist project. So it's people who, essentially a reaction to Celtic devolution, I think that's part of it, subconsciously, where an establishment felt they were losing control internally over the UK and then externally through the EU. And so the EU became that sort of vehicle for angst, if you like. And we thought, this has been confirmed, I think, with the internal market bill. Once Brexit had been done, the next target will be the devolved governments in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and that's obvious to us. And I can't see how someone can't see that. So I had a pop-up rally in Aberystwyth to call for independence, because I was intent that we have to change the debate. If we're going to be debating Brexit and that context, we're into a very tough line. So we have to change the discussion about independence. And the only way I think in Wales to defeat Brexit-ness, I'm not talking so much about the exact EU policy thing, which is essentially a British nationalist project, is with Welsh nationalism. Because, and I know nationalism is a dirty word, we can discuss that later, but it can mobilise people. So we have people in a big tanker phasing at what I think is a very nasty type of politics. They can immigrants as problems, scapegoating flawed societies, and they'll soon move on into single parent mothers and the poor. That's the next target. So we can sort of change that tanker and use the genuine anger people have, and dismay and disheartenedness which people have, and against the real target, which is Westminster. The problems affecting Wales, and actually in England, the problems facing Wales were not caused by the EU, they're caused by Westminster rule. It's Westminster which drowned our valleys, it's Westminster which closed coal mines and steel plants in the 1980s when I was growing up. It's Westminster which has got Wales into the state it is today. It's nothing to do with the EU. So we have to change the discourse, and that's what independence can do.
Yeah. So from what I've seen from the polling, and do correct me if I'm wrong, I think it seems that support for independence is higher amongst younger people. Yeah.
So sorry, I went on tangent there. So yeah, the reason for the change, I think, is partly from Brexit. I think as a segment of Welsh society, if you're the Welsh National Society, are very afraid of Brexit because we know where the next target. So the Celtic nations or the Celtic institutions are next. We know that. So I think that's hardened views within the traditional Plaid Cymru type nationalist person. Then I think there's a segment of Welsh society which, supported devolution, supported the UK, sort of felt that the UK wasn't perfect, but it had been middled along for 1,000 years, type of thing, and at least we didn't do this sort of stepping, which those friendly foreigners did with their big ideas, and Westminster, by definition, because it was sort of not political, sort of worked, and the imperfection, the sort of the bumblingness, if you like, quite appealed to some people. I know that the feeling of Wales was a part of a family of nations, and I think Brexit has shocked a lot of people's belief in Westminster, and then that's made a lot of people just question what they thought were common sense points of view before then. I think maybe it's not. And then I think this year, 2020, has been COVID. When COVID started in March or February, I thought it could be a big knock for the Yes Cumbria movement and independence. We'd had things arranged for this year in terms of big rallies in Wrexham, Tredegar, and in Swansea. Those had been cancelled. Obviously, we had other events. We were talking about big gig and stuff. These were cancelled. We had leaflets ready to come out, which we couldn't distribute. But I think what's happened in Wales is a big section of Welsh society, and there are some people against, but the big section have seen two things. One, they've seen that Westminster's handled things badly by and large, not as well, whilst the Welsh government, the Welsh Senedd, has handled things better. And people think, okay, Westminster isn't the mother of parliaments. It isn't the sort of the fountain of good politicians, but maybe things are better in Wales. I think there's a feeling in Wales that we had the Assembly, and it's okay, but it's like a pretendy parliament, and then you had Westminster, which is the proper grown-up parliament where serious politicians went. And I think that's to some extent been flipped, that people now think actually more and more that the Senedd in Cardiff is actually a bit more serious than in Westminster. So I think the handling of COVID by Westminster aligned with people feel that by and large the better handling by the Senedd has made people question and thinking, well, if we can do COVID better, then are there other things we can do better as well? And it's seen actually when the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament, hasn't listened to Westminster, diverged from Westminster view, it's actually handled things better. So I think that's a huge change. That I think the last poll, not by us, I think, or maybe it was by us, it's like over 70% felt that the Senedd had handled COVID better than Westminster. And a similar number think that Wales would handle its own taxation better than Westminster, which is a big change. So I think that's those maybe the three main things. I think also, and to lead on to your next question, there is a change in Welsh society as well. So you will see younger people are far more supportive of the Welsh language, or more relaxed with it, than older people. And same as the split obviously with Brexit there, but also with the Assembly. So younger people, I think the latest polls, it's on our website, like 87% support Devo Max. Devo Max can mean a lot of things for different people.
Yeah.
But that's basically everyone. And with independence, the younger cohort, I think 46% support independence, whereas over 65, it's like 16% support independence. It's hugely against.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it's just the nature of young people being more revolutionary, or do you think some people get less from Westminster? Maybe that's
I think there's other things going on. Maybe just younger people are open to new ideas. I think that's a general thing. Secondly, if you're under 50 anywhere in the UK, what has Westminster given you? There isn't. You can understand if you're born in 1940, like my parents were, or 1950s, or even 1960s. You've had your council housing, you've had your free education, you've seen the NHS been set up. You've had probably jobs for life. If you go into employment in the 1960s and 1970s, there are easy jobs to be had, even if you had no O levels or GCSEs. You could have a nice living, a decent living, a better living in a factory with no qualifications, and you could even buy a house and a car. Whereas if you're under 50, those things don't really exist. And so there isn't that emotional attachment, I think, with, so what has Westminster actually given you? Well, in my lifetime, it's given me a depression, 1980s, then the early 90s, then we've had austerity. Now, these aren't all down to Westminster, you could say that, but it's just nothing's been given. So I think there's that. There's also, if you're growing up, then the attitude to the language is maybe some kind of reflection. There's another poll done, I think, last year, which showed that, so the older people speak Welsh, obviously, we're quite supportive of the language. A lot of people aren't, and it does reflect the education system. So if you're brought up in 1940s and 50s, you may have had Welsh spoken in the school if you're in a Welsh-speaking area, but otherwise it may be like learning Latin or French. And there's a lot of fear and a lot of misunderstanding. Whereas anyone's born from in the 1980s and 1990s, they've had an element of Welsh education, even in English language school where Welsh has been. Now, maybe people don't speak Welsh, maybe they have no great affection for it, but they're not afraid of it. And I think, and they've also been brought up from with the Assembly, which was founded in 1999. So, anyone really born after 1990, or even the mid-80s, will not really remember a time where there hasn't been an element of Welsh in their education, and it's much more tactile now than it was, and softer, and much less about learning the grammar. And they've also been brought up with Assembly. So for them, the normal thing is to have an element of Welsh in their life, even if they don't speak it themselves, even if they don't have a passion for it. It's not something they're afraid of. And also they've had the Assembly where the norm is you're doing stuff in a Welsh context, aligned then with Westminster having not given them much. So I mean, that is sort of makes the Welsh, the context then is very different from someone born in the 1940s or 50s.
Okay. So you mentioned attacks on devolution. There's been a few. I mean, there was a comment in May by I don't know if you saw this, the Shrewsbury MP Daniel Korzynski.
It's actually incredible. I mean, this is a Polish man, born in Poland.
Yeah, it was the fact he complained about he couldn't, because Wales had separate rules, he couldn't go to his local beach because it was in Wales. And I mean, I almost laughed, but I think there was a serious point to that. And also, Mark Reckless, of course, then in July said that the Brexit Party, or I think it's called Reform UK now, I think it's changed, is going to campaign to abolish the Welsh Assembly. Yeah. I mean, I'm just wondering, what do you think about this increased sort of threatening language towards devolution?
Yeah.
A concern? Are you worried by it?
I'm very concerned about it because, there's a constituency in Wales which is, I would say, anti-Welsh. They like the landscape, they like the mountains, they can take the dogs for a walk, they like the fact that the houses are cheaper, but they have actually zero empathy, with the culture and the language and any distinctive Welshness. So they'd be quite happy or relaxed if it became extension of Gloucester or whatever. And that's not to disparage Gloucester either. And I think what Brexit has done is ennobled these people. And I think for 20 years it's sort of kept quiet. Well, the Tories were against devolution in 1999, they campaigned against it in 97, sorry. I think they stood neutral in the referendum we had 2011. But now they've been ennobled. And it's what we always knew. And this is why I was against Brexit. It's not so much to do with the European Union as to do, we knew they'd be coming for us. And it's basically, they like Wales, but only in the image of England. Like Africa, it's just pity so many, they are just giraffes there. And it's peculiar as well because they have this love affair with the United States, which with the states, Delaware has more powers in many respects than Welsh Assembly does. They have their own judiciary, which we don't have, which is unique in the world, by the way. So they've seen countries which do have an element of federalism, but they're against it happening in the UK. So when they talk about family of nations, it's skin deep, and at any chance they would undermine everything which gives anything distinctive Welsh identity. So I mean, it's quite. It's not surprising. It's what we knew would happen. The problem is these people have the backing of a lot of dark money. They also have if the papers decided to support them, they'd have that support, and then that would be amplified by the media, then treating the story. It is incredible with Korzynski in particular. I mean, he was born in Poland. It's a bit like saying, Silesia should be returned to Germany. Is this kind for someone to have zero awareness that, a nation next door to me is trying to fight for its own sort of identity, and you would think a Pole, someone of Polish descent, would have some kind of empathy, understanding of that, but obviously not.
I mean, for me, there was also a degree of hypocrisy in the sense that both these politicians, Mark Reckless and Korzynski, both said you can't have a second referendum on Brexit because you should respect the will of the people. Whereas the Welsh Assembly, we've had 2 referendums. And the absolute bonkers thing, these people are banging on about, in the 2016 referendum for Brexit, how successful small countries like Norway and Iceland and Switzerland and Singapore was. You couldn't move away from the radio for people saying how great Singapore was or Switzerland was outside the EU. But then when it comes to another small, it's every small nation is successful, and probably the Cayman Islands more particular than anyone else. But Wales uniquely cannot have independence. I can't even call its own descent to devolution. And
I'm reading stuff around people are now saying that to be against an Israeli state, the Jewish state, the one Jewish state in the world, is verging on anti-Semitism, because you want to deny a particular community, a unique community, a nation state. And you can argue differently on the borders of those states, and you can debate that. When someone is against Wales, a unique language, and having some kind, I'm not even talking about independence, but some kind of parliament against that, then that for me is really anti. You're essentially saying you do not believe this community has a right to exist on its own terms at all, and that to me is a very dark alley to go down to. And it's again, they understand the concept of the nation state. They're very supportive of that, but obviously some nations are more equal than others, and that their idea of a nationality can exist, but mine can't. And Welsh nationalists aren't anti-English. We want an English and independent England, or we're happy for it to be. We're in favour of Westminster continuing, but not over Wales. But essentially, people saying that Wales cannot have its parliament even. And that's a very dark place to go, I think.
So, looking, I'm just wondering, when looking at other independence movements, I mean, obviously the major one, not disrespecting your movement, is Scotland in the UK. It's the most successful, it's the most support. Can the Welsh independence movement learn from the Scots, or could it learn from other independence movements around Europe, or should it? It would be focused.
Yeah, we learn from lots of people, and have for decades. So I mean, the independence movement, if you like, from the 19th century has always been very international, and in the 19th century inspired by Masaryk, inspired by Kossuth in Hungary. There's like poems in support of Kossuth in the Hungarian revolution. Then Mazzini was very popular as well, and then going into the 20th century, the idea of the independent states across Europe, and Ireland in particular is a big example, and led to the founding of Plaid Cymru in the 1920s. More recently, then Scotland and Catalonia, I think, have been big inspirations. Catalonia, there's been links with them for decades because language, so the success of their language policy was something that's been trying to be replicated here in Wales, and maybe more particular with the Basques, because it's more similar to Wales in terms of population and percentage of speakers. But that's always been there. And I was personally inspired by Catalans. I had a Catalan lodger with me in 1999. He learned Welsh here in Aberystwyth. A good friend of mine, still in contact with him. And I remember around the 2010s, when they started having these mass rallies, I was saying we should be having something like this in Wales, because obviously at the time there's some feeling of unease, but it wasn't being channeled. And because we didn't have a mass rallies then, and in a Welsh nationalist project, people went for British nationalism. And there's a vacuum, and the national movement failed to fill that vacuum. It thought that just churning out policies gets people into politics. It doesn't. So I think that, and the success also of the Catalan, where their referendum for independence started off, where basically the politicians didn't want it. I remember talking to people in Catalonia, and they're talking to CIU, the Christian Democrat nationalist main parties run the country since the 1980s, were against referendum independence. And this Esquerra Republicana, which is the left-wing nationalist, which is aligned to Plaid Cymru and I think SNP in Scotland, they were very circumspect. And I understand the arguments, because the argument essentially was, look, boys, we control everything basically domestically in Catalonia. We're sorting out the language, we control the hospitals, the roads, the rails, the police now. The only thing we don't really is the currency, but that's the euro, and the army. I remember speaking to Catalans because I was running the campaign for .Cymru, which is the internet domain for Wales, and we were inspired by .cat. The Catalans had got that for themselves in 2007, something like that. And so I was in almost weekly contact with Catalans at that time. And they were saying the only thing left with the Spanish state really is the head of the monarchy and the army, and nobody takes much notice of the army because it's full of Bolivians who just basically want to go to somewhere where they can get a new job. And say, well, why rock the boat? But in the end, people had local referendums in the villages, and that's what pushed the politicians towards independence. So that the Catalan experience showed that a movement could be grassroots and not wait for the OK from the political party, which is a mistake we'd done in Wales, which is waiting for Plaid Cymru to lead it, or Plaid Cymru Youth, which didn't. The experience of Scotland was very, very instructive. First, the guts to hold a referendum. I remember being in Glasgow in 2007 when the SNP started their first minority government, and Plaid Cymru were in coalition with Labour. And I was talking to the boys again because I was running the .Cymru campaign. Yeah. And there's a campaign in Scotland for .Scot, so we were in close contact with them as well. But I'm thinking, this is a big risk. How are you going to keep this for 4 years? But they did it. And then when they said they're going to have a referendum, I thought, this is bonkers. They're going to lose. This is going to kill the referendum. And I was thinking of 1979 in Wales, where it was a huge hit. So the guts to do that against the might of the British state and the media and everything, I thought was a huge test of character and very impressive. And then, the way they conducted the referendum was very interesting from Wales, because in Wales we've had, the Welsh language has been like the orange card, if you like. The easy way to divide the debate was, if you vote for an assembly, the Welsh speakers will be running the shop, and if you're a Welsh speaker, those non-Welsh speaking people down in the valleys will be running Wales, and so it's used as a device to split Wales. And the same situation doesn't happen in Scotland, but they have this Highland and Tuchter and the Catholic and Protestant split, so there are splits there. And I was just impressed with the dialogue they had, which didn't go into identity and individual identity and all that business. But by and large, and obviously there's always some problems, but was respectful of people, just kept it simply on a constitutional question. So didn't go into business about monarchy, didn't go into, it's going to become, a socialist paradise, or it's going to become that's right kind of country, like Estonia type of thing. And didn't say you had to be Scottish and stuff. And that was the wording, the conduct of that referendum, I think, was very impressive. And the crowd, small group of us organised a rally in Cardiff. I was in Aberystwyth, so I didn't play a huge part in that, but we organised a rally in Cardiff in support of the referendum in Scotland in September 2014. I went up there in 2013 myself to a rally in Carlton Hin, and then went up to canvass on the referendum day, I think, in 2014, and was there when they lost. But I think there's a huge effect, and it led directly to the founding of Yes Cumbria. And we thought, okay, there's going to be another referendum in Scotland sometime. This debate is something which Wales has to have, and even if it's just 300 of us, fine. You have to take a political position, and what hadn't happened in Wales ever really was no one had seriously taken a political position on independence, not self-government. And we decided in Yes Cumbria, we're not going to support federalism, we're not going to have self-government, or can federalism. Other people can do that. These are all legitimate positions to have. But our job historically, if you like, is to have a position for independence. And people can agree with us or not, but that's the position. You have to have this role in the political spectrum. And that's what we've done. And we always thought that was the right thing to do. And, it's been proven right. And I think events in the future will prove again that it's the right decision to have, because I don't think the other positions, federalism, something will happen.
So I was going to ask about Yes Cumbria. So what role does Yes Cumbria play in the independence movement, especially in regards to, obviously, you've got Plaid Cymru, which is the Welsh Nationalist Party. I think some people might get a bit confused because they probably both have what role does it play?
Yeah, I think some people on Twitter get that confused. Yeah, so just to say quickly for your listeners, so Plaid Cymru is the Welsh National Party, founded in 1925. So it's like the SNP. So
yeah.
Yes Cumbria, the Yes comes from the Yes campaign in Scotland, is a non-party political, cross-party pressure group for independence. So basically our goal is for Wales to have a seat in the United Nations, international recognition, and then to have its own written constitution. So that's basically internal independence. So will Wales be a part of NATO? We don't know. That's not our call. That's something for Wales to decide. Will Wales keep the monarchy? That's not our call. That's something for people to decide after independence. So the currency, we're outlining the three options. You're keeping sterling, the Welsh currency, or the euro. Essentially, that's the choice. But it's up, we don't take a line on that. So we're solely pushing the idea of Welsh independence. So we don't have a monopoly on the truth of independence. We are not the only group. There's another pressure group, smaller, more left-wing group called Undod, which means unity in Welsh. So they support independence. There's a group of Labour Party members called Labour for Indy, the independent of us. So there are other groups now. There's a Indy Tank, which is a think tank being set up for independence. So there are other groups. So we don't have a monopoly. We often share the stuff. We are in close contact, but I mean, and implied to put the biggest party for independence. And that's interesting because they weren't really for independence until quite recently. I mean, the history of Welsh nationalism, there was a philosophical problem with the word independence, unlike the SNP, which has always been very upfront. And I mean, the philosophy was that, I think it's partly down to cowardness. They felt there wasn't votes in it, and they would lose more votes. There's also the fear within the big section of Welsh national movement that what they felt the Irish situation was, where they got independence, but the language is lost. For a lot of people in the Welsh national movement, Welsh speakers, the language is more important than independence. Okay. So a lot of people, maybe if they were Scottish, would be pushing for the constitutional settlement. In Wales, maybe a constituency of people were putting the language more important than independence. And so independence would be, yes, we like it, but it's not important. The important thing is you have a Welsh language television channel, you have legal status of the language, or the Welsh language schools and stuff. That was the priority. And then also the discussion was quite interesting, that no country actually is independent unless you're Enver Hoxha's Albania, which was a disaster. We're all interdependent, and that actually there's something to be said for having something supranational. So like the EU or the United Nations, which is above the nation state, because there's a danger, as we've seen in the 20th century, of fetishizing the nation state. So there was an intellectual discussion and also rejection of the actual word independence. But what that means is just confuses people, because people still think for independence, and you also undermine a movement for independence and the argument. So we decided we're going to use just independence. We never use words of government. We never use anything similar to that. It's or sovereignty. It's just independence. So people have to get used to the word. That's we don't have the monopoly, but I think we've been instrumental in changing the debate in Wales. So Labour Party members now are starting to discuss, maybe, okay, we need to stop using this word separatists. It's not useful. There's an argument to be had here. The First Minister, Mark Drakeford, sometimes comes out with something which we call indecurious here in Wales, but then the next day we'll come out with something saying that the unity of the British state is more important. So I mean, the debate is changing very quickly, and the incredible thing here is it's changing from what has what one would expect to be one of identity, though so that's still very important, of course, and to more to do with one of governance. So people are increasingly supporting independence, not just because I feel Welsh, but it's basically because I just think we can do a better job running Wales than Westminster. So we get a lot of people who are not Welsh. There's no reason for them to become Welsh. They don't have to change the language or anything. We don't ask that, but it's just taking the view that actually Wales can do a better job at running itself. And we actually support that now more than why have this middleman in Westminster where we're just wasting time sending people to Westminster to undermine or overrule stuff we're doing in Wales.
It's interesting. I'm talking about the confused message. I think, was it in the 90s, Plaid Cymru had a policy of Wales being a member state of the EU, but it didn't support. Well, it didn't explicitly say independence.
Yeah, and that's the nonsense, isn't it? I mean, I remember there was a friend of mine, Alwyn ap Hugh. I remember going to a Plaid Cymru youth movement in the 1990s, and this issue of independence came up, and he said, every election since he could remember the 1960s, people said, oh, well, now is not the time to talk about independence. And he said, if they started to talk about independence in the 1960s, maybe the time would come, because people would be used to the argument. And that always stuck with me. Pride wanted to be an independent nation state, so they supported Estonia becoming independent. They supported the other countries, but with Wales, oh, we're not too sure. And people just see through it. People just felt, you're either being a bit shifty, you're not being honest with us.
Yeah.
But also, every time they'd go on television or an interview denying they were independent, they were losing a minute and a half, but actually they could be making the case for independence. And what Yes Cumbria has done said, yes, we do support independence, and this is why, our GDP is higher than in Spain. Our tax intake is higher than per head, is higher than New Zealand. We export twice as much electricity as we use. So rather than wasting time deflecting from it, we use those 30 seconds, that 1 minute on TV or radio, to promote independence. And then, surprise, surprise, people are hearing these debates and coming over to it. So, it was a ridiculous situation. People bogged down, a ridiculous situation.
So, in September, the Plaid Cymru's Independence Commission published, I've got it here, the Towards an Independent Wales report. I'm just wondering, what did you make of the report, and do you think it benefits the independence movement to have stuff like this coming out?
I welcome the report. I think it's a chunky report. There's a lot in it. There's some things which aren't in it. But I think, and there's been criticism of the report that it's been too defensive. It hasn't just said exactly we want independence, this is going to happen, this is the currency situation and stuff. So I think there's still an element of timidity within some sections of Plaid Cymru just to grab independence and run with it, and an effort to sort of try and appeal to the indie-skeptic, and a lack of confidence in saying you can actually just change people's minds. This is what politics is about. You can actually change people's minds, and sometimes that's how change happens. And if you're always not trying to make it easy for someone else, you're not actually changing them. But I think it's to be welcomed. There's a lot there. Maybe this is part of the reason for the report, which someone who doesn't support independence, but maybe supports Devo Max, whatever that is, or Home Rule, whatever that is, can actually implement.
Yeah.
So you could be a Labour Party. Mark Drakeford could implement most of the recommendations in that report, and he could still call himself a unionist.
Well, I can say the one that comes to mind is obviously the judiciary. There's a whole chapter on the judiciary. I must admit it's a bit of a slog to read. But
and I don't think that there's a need to why. It's self-evident. Wales is the only legislature in the world, that is the only country with its own parliament, which doesn't have its own judiciary. Even as I said, Delaware, Arkansas, Connecticut in the US have their own judiciary, or Prince Edward Island, I suppose, in Canada. This is absolute nonsense. So I didn't quite understand why they needed to go into so much detail about that, because the only thing that's stopping that really now is Tories in Westminster. But there's other things there, to do with setting up a bank, if I remember correctly, and things to do with civil service, and which you could still call yourself a proud unionist and support and say it's part of a new UK. But there's also things there which does map out, which the government post the election in May 2021 here in Wales need to be implementing in any case. And again, I use this analogy, and I use it quite often. Some people don't believe in climate change. It's happening, I think. But even if you don't believe in climate change, recycling more stuff is good. Trying to get more people on public transport is good. Building housing and offices which are more eco-efficient is good. Trying to cut down on carbon emissions is good. Using less plastic is good. All these things are good in any case.
Yeah.
So even if there's no climate change, it's still worth doing these things. And same with this Plaid report. Even if you don't believe in independence, a lot of that is worth doing in any case, just in terms of strengthening and improving Welsh governance. But I think, so it's been to be welcomed. I would love to see other parties come out with a line. And this is a big concern in Yes Cumbria. There's going to be election 2021 in Wales and Scotland. It looks to me like the Scots will vote for the SNP. So the SNP will have a majority or a plurality of votes. As I said, with the Catalan experience, I can understand maybe senior members of the SNP thinking, why risk having a referendum when we already run Scotland. We can do a lot of things as it is. Maybe, why risk it? But I think if the SNP don't hold a referendum, the party would split. So I think Sturgeon will be forced to hold a referendum. I think they will win that referendum because I think for lots of small reasons, I think there's some of the people saying they're against independence now are basically saying they just don't want a referendum because it's such a difficult thing to have. It's stressful for people. And I think such a very tiny minority of those people actually just won't vote. They won't be for independence, but they won't actually go out to vote for the union. So I think you can shave off a couple of percentage points of people against independence there. And I think who's actually going to run the campaign? There will not be a ground campaign for the union, whereas the independence movement will have rallies, it'll have people street stalls, it'll have people canvassing doors, and the unionist campaign will all be online, which can be very effective, and they'll depend on inertia, which is actually a very powerful movement in politics. Just why bother? So I think they'll win. And Wales then is in a very difficult situation because if we don't have a plan for independence, and if we don't have a government in May, which at the very least is planning for the possibility of independence, then we are going to be stuffed. Because we'll have about 2 years and proclaim independence. Otherwise, the Westminster juggernaut will just run over us. And this is why I say, Wales in 10 years' time, at the end of the decade, as it is now, and things can change, but as it is now, Wales will either be independent by the end of the decade, or it will be incorporated into Westminster rule, direct Westminster rule, with some kind of maybe skeleton of a parliament or an assembly there, just to sort of keep face. But that is a stark choice. The only thing I can see that would change that would be possibly some fluke or Labour government in the next 18 months in the UK, maybe coming out with a plan which is so radical, which somehow manages to keep Scotland on board, but it's not too radical for England, and I can't see how that's possible, to be honest.
Yeah. So looking to 2021, the elections for the Senate, will Yes Cumbria be campaigning? Will you advocate a vote for Plaid, or?
Right. We won't stand as a party because some people have asked that. That's not going to happen. No way. We're actually discussing this weekend. I think what we'll probably do, and we sort of approached this earlier, is we'll be contacting all candidates and all parties to see their view on independence, and then we'll be publishing that, which is standard procedure for all pressure groups, be that Friends of the Earth or Shelter Cymru, whatever. Okay. And then it'd be for the individuals. But I think people need to start thinking about voting for independence. I think if we get into the line of I'm voting to keep the Tories out, then we're in a very, that's not going to work. People seriously start thinking there is things could change or collapse in the UK perspective very, very quickly. And the time for just voting because I've always voted this way, or just voting to keep the Tories out is not an option anymore. So I don't think we'll be telling people which party to vote for, but people need to vote for independence, and on all political parties. I think even if the Tories is a legitimate question for Conservatives in Wales, what will you do when Scotland leaves? And because I think Northern Ireland will then, and we're in discussions with Irish people, there will be a unity referendum in Ireland in a few years' time. We don't know when. I think that will also be won as well, because certainly when Scotland's gone, the big chunk of unionist identity, which is so close to Scottish identity, is gone. And I don't think there'll be the passion to fight for the union there. So I think all people in Wales, whatever their politics today, need to think what will happen in a few years' time.
That's interesting. So, finally, I just want to discuss, I guess, your personal, maybe not your personal vision, but what an independent Wales would look like. I know you've said it would be up to the Welsh people, so it's quite a big principle, things like the monarchy, EU membership, things like that. But maybe just sort of discuss more broadly, I guess, what sort of a country, what sort of nationalism should Wales produce? What sort of country should Wales be?
Yeah, well, I think Wales would be better run as an independent country. So a lot of the expenditure, the hubris of the British state is gone. So the obsession with the military and spending, at the moment, there will be a Welsh military. I'd imagine be similar more to the Irish one, but it not necessarily could still be in NATO. But we will not be paying for Trident. So I mean that's about £200 million a year saved, almost £250 million saved instantly. So I think a lot of that, and the waste, we're seeing with Westminster. I think that'll be gone. The government will be closer to people. So I think and with less of the opaque rules which are part of Westminster, which increases the Westminster system. So I think there'll be better government. I think it will be one which actually, by and large, will be greener. I think because we have industries we can exploit, to use maybe an unfortunate word in that respect, but can be using that because we have 15% of Europe's tidal power. I mean, done there. I think there will be a more effort in terms of trying to get an element of decentralization as well. So that's sort of happened to some extent, but not to the extent it should. But I think people will feel that they don't want things to be all in Cardiff, and there will be movements towards making sure that doesn't happen. And I think that'll be a very big part of any post-independence setup. That'll be an instrumental to discussion of that. So I think there'll be more decentralized powers, or certainly economic powers locally, and I think we'll be a happier place. I mean, when Wales is sort of independent, and rugby and football is the obvious one there, people like it. And I mean, and people say it's not the same, but in a way it is, because if someone said if there was a UK football team, and I said, look, I want a Wales football team, we get the same arguments against it, that we can't afford it, we're not big enough, we don't have the talent, but we have the FAW, and it's fantastic. And it doesn't get payouts from the FA in England. It's done it's at tricky times. But it's doing everything now self-sufficiently. The organisation is independent of the FA, but works closely with them, works closely with UEFA and with FIFA, and has success. And they've done stuff, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, in a very Welsh way as well. They've embraced the language, they play with the languages, and in a way which has not been threatening to people who don't speak Welsh, but it's been very well supported by people who do, or people who are learning. I think that the name we have internationally has been very good. We saw that when we were in the Euros in France, and there's a good name for the Welsh fans. We didn't riot and stuff like that. And I think we would find the same were we independent. And I just look at Ireland, who have now on the United Nations Security Council, and they won that by vote. So the UK has a seat on the United Nations Security Council because of the Second World War. They managed to get into that. But the Irish were actually voted by other nations. So I mean, the Irish soft power has been fantastically effective, and we're lumped with what is basically the drunk uncle in the wedding party. It's an embarrassing state, but the Irish, being independent, have managed to create alliances and create a narrative for themselves, which actually strikes a chord with a lot of countries. And I think Wales can do that. And one of the reasons, people do actually sometimes look to Wales. I know it is surprising for people in Wales to think, I mean, we're the third best country in the world in terms of recycling. This is something we should be proud of. I think a lot of countries, talking about Catalans and nations in Europe, do look to Wales in terms of language planning. I don't think we're very good there, but we're better in some places. I think people have seen some of the things which have been adopted here. The Germans and the Swiss are discussing, when we went into lockdown in, October, 2-week lockdown, the German and Swiss saying, look, we should do this as well, and then adopted something similar. So when Wales has taken its own course, actually people are quite interested in what we're doing. And I think the Welsh experience, for a lot of people in Wales, felt was the anomaly and the embarrassment, the sort of, maybe there's having this silly language nobody spoke, and and holding us back and too small. But actually, if you look at the world today, I mean, every country in some respects has the Welsh experience. So everyone essentially now is bilingual in English and their home language, be that sort of Estonian or be that Zulu or whatever, or Spanish even. So everyone is now grappling with this situation, both with the benefit of speaking a global language, which is a huge benefit, and also wanted to somehow keep their own traditions alive. So what was the anomaly maybe 50 years ago and seen as a bit embarrassment and awkward is now actually quite mainstream across Europe, if you like. So I think that's something. And also a lot of people who come from outside the UK to live in Wales, their own national experience, or even in their own family experience, in some way mirrors Wales. An element of colonials at some time, an element of diglossia or language use, or which one say an element of concern that their children and grandchildren will not, their traditions, and that's a sort of very Welsh experience. So these, I know, are maybe coming from a country where they've always been sort of misunderstood or overlooked for some people. I'm always surprised. The Austrians understand Wales maybe more than Germans, because they sort of feel they obviously. So so a lot of people who do move into Wales actually find out that the Welsh experience is something they can identify with at some level, either at their own national level or maybe their own even family level. And so that's just one reason we have members in Yes Cumbria who are not Welsh. We have Nikki Sharkett on Twitter, a lady from New Delhi, who's a Welshman. She's been doing great videos supporting Welsh independence. As an Indian person, we have people from the strong and the oldest ethnic minority countries in Cardiff supporting the independence movement. People who are German, people who are Irish. So I think for all of these people, it makes sense, and because the nuances and the complexes and the sensitivity around identity stuff in Wales, and we've tried to navigate that as a nation for decades now. I think a lot of people quite appreciate that sensitivity and that lack of firm lines, because it gives them a space to express their own identity as well. So I think it'd be a great place. I really think Wales would be a great place. And when we're independent, people think, why didn't we do this earlier? It'll be why did we waste decades and centuries thinking we couldn't do this? And no country which has become independent of the UK has ever asked to go back. In Ireland, I remember going there the first time in 1989 when they had a depression and it's pretty bad there. But even then, nobody's asking about going back to the UK, and there isn't even a Facebook page with some bloke in his pants in his mother's bedroom asking for independence to rejoin the union now. Whatever some of the Tories may think, it doesn't happen. And they're quite happy, and I think Wales would be the same.
Okay. So this is a final question. You talked about the international element of Yes Cumbria. How important is it for Wales moving forward, progressing the Welsh identity, that it remains an outward-looking internationalist identity and doesn't fall into the trap, which I think lots of nationalisms have, like British nationalism, I think you could argue, become much more inward-looking, much more fearful of outsiders. How important is it to...
Yeah, I think Welsh nationalism has always been international-looking. There is the challenge in Wales, because, I just don't understand it. But when I hear some people, British people, complain about all these ethnic minorities in London, thinking, Christ, they're all speaking your language. They all support your state. The Queen, they all support they vote for your parties. Why is this a problem for you? There's a situation in Wales because we have a minorities language, and it's in the threat. So that is something which is different. And but I've been pleasantly surprised when Yes Cumbria is formed in 2015. We got together, formed officially in February 2016. I sort of felt that the issue of identity, and especially with the language, would be a problem, or it would be somewhere there. Not saying it's a good thing about it, there would be people, and to my surprise, it hasn't. There is debate. Some people think we use too much Welsh. Some people think we don't use enough. There are some issues about how people express themselves, but I'm not saying any great anti-English sentiment, because I don't think it exists. It's an anti-Westminster. We also in Yes Cumbria we very rarely use the word England or English, because our argument isn't with England or with English. Scots with Westminster. And I think that's something we learned from the Scots. But by using that, that was always the case in any case. But I think it just makes it clearer, and it also just gets rid of this sort of quagmire where you then get arguing what is Welsh and what is English, and oh god, just boring. So I think it's incumbent on us to be respectful of people and to express ourselves in ways which do not allow people to misinterpret what we're saying and what the main issue is. And I think there is no future for a Wales which is white and sees itself as white, and I don't think anyone is actually arguing for that. But, that isn't reality now, and there's no future for it. And also, I don't think people would want to be a part of it in any case.
Yeah.
So it would be seen as weird. That isn't to say that we're not proud of things which are uniquely Welsh, and then we celebrate things which are of this land for hundreds of years or something. And I also don't think in the long run there's much legs for a movement which is seen to be anti-something all the time. That works very well for a short period, and we've seen that with elements of Brexit, and we saw that with Trumpism. But in the end, people get fed up with it because it just makes them feel rubbish.
Yeah.
And after a while, people just don't want that in their life, so they just disengage. So I think even from a strategic point of view, as well as the moral point of view, I think it's the Yes Cumbria and the independence movements, and I think it is by and large, is mostly positive, is mostly trying to be welcoming, is mostly trying to be respectful of different people. Don't get it right always, and it'll always be people, someone's always sees something. And I think because the hope will overlast fear. And if you start off with just the fear part, which is a very big emotive thing to get people activated, and it does with us, because there's the fear that the whole of devolution will be got rid of. But people who are fearful and depressed and angry, after a while, don't do stuff. Because you do stuff which makes you happy. That's why you go to football matches. That's why you go to the cinema. That's why you go to cafes to meet. You do stuff which makes you happy. If you do stuff which makes you angry all the time, after a while you just can't do it. So the national movement, I think, has to be populist in terms of doing stuff which people understand and not just being bogged down with documents. But it also has to be positive, and that means being welcoming of different people. And I think in the end that does win out, even if in the short term you lose the battle. But in the end you win the war.
And on that much happier, positive note, thank you so much for your time, Sean. I really appreciate you coming on.
Good. Anytime, just give me a shout out. If there's anything I missed out, welcome to give me a call.
Thanks very much. Cheers. Bye.
Sure, sir. Ta-ra.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this latest episode of PhD-Politico Discussions. If you enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to give it a like. And if you want to watch more content like this, then please do subscribe. Bye guys.